This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Julie Castle, who has dedicated her life to saving animals. Since joining Best Friends Animal Society in 1996 as employee number 17, she has grown with the organization and advanced its mission to save the lives of dogs and cats in America's animal shelters. Now CEO, Julie has helped guide Best Friends through a period of significant growth, including expanding the organization's fundraising from $60 million to more than $130 million. Under her leadership, Best Friends has been recognized as a Harris Poll Brand of the Year 4 times and named one of Fast Company's most innovative companies. Throughout her career, Julie has championed an approach rooted in collaboration, helping bringing together shelters, rescues, and communities around our shared commitment to life-saving. Celebrating 30 years with Best Friends in 2026, Julie remains focused on strengthening the partnerships, the policies, and momentum needed to help every shelter and every community reach no kill. She leads a team of nearly 1,000 employees working toward one shared mission: save them all. Julie, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Hey, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start a little context. I mean, your story is very compelling, but let's even start further back in that. Tell us kind of where you grew up, some of your early influences, and I love the story of how you ended up where you are today by a streak of luck, I guess, or something even deeper than that.
Yeah, I grew up in Utah, right outside Salt Lake City, and had a really great childhood. Was a went skiing a lot with my family and was very active in school, played a lot of sports. Was one of those kids that was involved in a lot of different things. And around about the time I was ready to graduate from high school, I decided that I wanted to be an attorney. I had a family that was really entrepreneurial. My father had a bunch of different businesses that he ran, and my brothers had all started their own businesses. So I kind of had that mindset and um, decided that I really wanted to do pre-law in college. And so, political science is a big part of that mix. And I got to spend a year in Washington, D.C. on the Hill, where I did mostly a communications focused internship, which was really informative, and I loved it. And I loved Washington. And I was 100% convinced that, I was going to end up in and around those parts at some point in my life. And uh, I graduated from college and got into a bunch of great law schools, including the University of Virginia, which is the one that I really wanted to go to because of their ethos and philosophy. And my friends and I decided, okay, we've got the summer to totally goof around before the life gets really serious. And so we took a trip to Mexico in my 1979 Dodge Colt. And
Okay.
it didn't have any air conditioning. I had every panel on the car was a different color because I'd been in so many car accidents. And um, eventually ran out of money and had just enough for a candy bar each and gas to get back home. And it was an 1,800-mile drive.
Oh
And
my God.
so we decided to drive straight through. We were grumpy, but I had this friend with us who wanted to stop at this animal sanctuary in southern Utah, and none of us wanted to. We were tired and hungry and gross, and we finally gave in and thought, okay, we'll just placate her. We'll stop by for a couple hours. And so we pulled into this absolutely magnificent canyon in the heart of Red Rock country in southern Utah, wedged right between Zion National Park and the Grand Canyon. And we pulled in, and I couldn't believe it. It was so incredible. And we decided to take a tour, and I became fascinated with the story of this place and the founders and the vision of no kill and the fact that they had built this sanctuary with their bare hands with no experience in building. And it was such a cool story. And at that point in time, the only thing that I really understood about animal shelters or animal sanctuaries was the experience I had in college when I wanted to adopt a kitten. And I went down to the local shelter, which, like many, was down by the city dump. And, a corrugated metal roof, cinder block building. I walk into the shelter, and there was this cowboy sitting at the desk with a cowboy hat on. His boots were propped up on the table, reading the paper. And I looked around, there were no animals. And I said, what happened to all the animals? And he said, oh, well, I took care of them. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, every morning, whatever animals are here, I take them out back, I put them in a barrel and hook them up to the back of the pickup. And I just thought, what? What? We live in, this modern era, and this is how we are treating our best friends, our cats and dogs, members of our family. I couldn't believe it. And so fast forward to my visit to the sanctuary, I pulled out of the sanctuary, and the next gas station that we hit, I put a couple of quarters into the payphone and called my dad and said, I'm not going to the University of Virginia law school. I'm moving to Kanab, Utah, and I'm going to go work at this sanctuary. And there was this very long, pregnant pause on the other end of the phone. And I essentially never left. I became employee 17.
Yeah.
My first paycheck was $183, and basically did whatever it took to keep the lights on back in the day. And, we didn't have job descriptions or anything like that. You just show up to work and you'd get your daily assignment. And maybe one day it was fixing the radiator on the old Ford truck, or installing an irrigation system, or giving a tour to visitors, or working in Dogtown. It was terrific. It was so fun. And
It's
I learned a lot, and it was sort of my entree into where I've been for 30 years now.
so I'm thinking of the story, which is extremely compelling. But you grew up in Utah, so going into this canyon, I mean, if you came from, East Coast or the plains and saw this canyon, I can see that spiritual effect it might have. But you kind of grew up around that kind of scenery, so you come into this canyon. So was it the canyon and the setting, or was it the people working there, or were it the animals that you saw? What was it that it sounds like almost a spiritual transformation that happened that made you change all your plans?
It's such a great question. And of course, where I grew up, it was, Park City and Alta and Snowbird and these fantastic mountains that are part of the Rocky Mountain Range.
Yeah.
And so it was a much different environment. But where I went to college was right in the heart of Red Rock country in southern Utah. You've got 5 national parks to choose from, and the beauty is spectacularly endless. And so, but there was something different about pulling into that canyon. It was the combination of the canyon itself, which was an old movie set. Um, a lot of the old westerns were filmed in this canyon. John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and the outlaw Josie Wales and the Lone Ranger series were all filmed literally right outside my office. And so
Wow.
it's spectacularly beautiful, but when you combine that with the mission of the place and the animals that inhabit the canyon and the wildlife that's here and the quiet and the serenity and the founder's story of how they said, we really believe that um, our best friend should not die. And it was such a simple statement. Why are we killing our best friends? Let's start this sanctuary. It all of that coming together is just such a magical combination, and it just blew my mind. And I think I hear it every day from visitors that come here. We get about 80 to 100,000 visitors a year, and a lot of them stop by our cafe. And whenever I'm in the cafe having lunch, I always ask, is this your first visit? And if they say yes, I love to hear the story through their eyes because these stories are almost word for word the same. Just you can't describe it in a photo, you can't articulate it in a story. It's just something that you have to experience.
So I get all that. I understand it. It's emotional. It just really hits you hard. Yet you're very brave at 22 years old to give up what you'd planned for so long, going to law school, doing all. Where does that courage come from? What? And it sounded like it came fairly quickly, a couple hours. So where do you think that courage came from?
I mean, I think part of it honestly was yes. I mean, of course, it's something that I'd worked toward for a very long time, and it was a lot of hard work to get into a school like Virginia and to just say in a moment, I'm not doing this. I think part of it was, you know, there were a couple of things I think that framed it up for me. One was before my friends and I went to Mexico, I had dinner with a couple of friends up in Salt Lake, and there were probably 12 people at this dinner, and they were all attorneys, and they'd all been in practice for a while. And I was all excited about telling them I was on my way to law school, and to the person, they all said, "Ah, we wish we would have chosen a different career." So that was kind of in the background. But then when I was in Mexico, I read The Alchemist. And it's such a great book, and it's so simple, and the message is so simple. But I think what it did is it framed up the opportunity for me to be able to see sometimes life presents an open door for you. And if you're really in tune, and I don't want to sound too woo woo here, but I really believe it's all part of you utilizing your sixth sense. And if you're in tune and in the moment, you see those doors of opportunity. And this was absolutely one of those. And so when it came down to it, the decision at the moment was not hard. And I think part of it too was just I could see the vision of the place, the sanctuary, the beauty, the mission. And I just knew this was a cause and a nonprofit that really would resonate with people from every walk of life. And so part of it was that entrepreneurial spirit I think that I grew up with too. Just recognizing a really good thing when you see it and you want to be a part of that.
Okay, so you have this vision of how cool this could be and how awesome it is and whatever. So you become employed or you become an employee of the company. But now you're cleaning up stalls or whatever, you're digging ditches, you're doing all these really low level jobs, which probably made you think, what did I do at some point? I'm curious is what lessons did you learn doing those really low level jobs that help you now as a CEO managing the whole organization?
Well, I'm not gonna lie. There were moments where I thought, what did I do? I just gave up this really incredible opportunity. And, I think that being a hand to mouth operation, which we were, when I started, we were an $800,000 operation. And we were very, everybody had to pull their weight. And, there was no slacking off. And you really had to learn how to learn, and you had to learn how to figure stuff out. And because, it didn't matter when you showed up to work, you didn't know what basket you were going to get of problem solving. And like I said before, it could have been anything from fixing a car to giving a tour. And so one of the most interesting things, though, was the DNA of the organization really was on full display back then. And it's all about doing the right thing and grit. And that those elements are still threaded throughout the organization today, which I'm incredibly proud of, because it's hard to hang on to those kind of things. And, when you're faced with kind of a do or die situation, which we very much were in, to the point where, there were days where we would get deployed to different cities around the Western United States to sit in front of a grocery store with a coffee can and, a fold out of the animals and a card table and a mailing list, a sign up for a mailing list. Um, and you had to sit there all day and ask for donations. And we would collect the names and the phone numbers and the addresses, and then we'd collect the money. I'd go to the bank and deposit the money that evening, and I would fax, this is telling my age,
Yeah.
fax those lists back to the sanctuary, and within a week we would call those folks and thank them for their donation. And that's how we built that's how we built our membership base. And to this day, we still have people that come to visit who say, I met you in front of a Gelson's in Los Angeles, or a Whole Foods, in Phoenix, and it's remarkable how I think, we learned how important that personal connection was very early on, and how building that trust and that community, which to me very much represents this organization, it was how important it was to us. So, um, when I look back on those early days to where we are today, a lot of those elements that really built the organization, I have been very intentional in my leadership about maintaining those throughout the organization.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit for those who may not know exactly. So what does we say no kill? What does no kill actually mean? So you have all these animals that come to the shelter. So define no kill for us.
So I think in order for people to understand this, it's important just to understand where we started as a nation. And it was around 150 years ago. And it really started in New York City when there were a lot of stray dogs running around the streets of New York. And the public was very concerned about rabies, as they should have been. And so they demanded that the government do something about it. So the government put a bounty on all of these stray dogs. And so what happened was you had these bounty hunters running around picking up these dogs, and they were getting a quarter for every dog. And they'd round the dogs up and put them in a metal cage and dunk them in the East River. And the public was horrified by this and basically said, that isn't exactly what we meant. Can you please do something that's kinder and more humane? So we started to build shelters, and shelters started to pop up in communities all over the country. And sadly, the same exact thing was happening only behind closed doors. Animals were coming in and being killed. And so this went on for decade after decade after decade until the founders showed up and said, what are we doing? Why are we choosing to kill our best friends? And we're going to change this, and we want to create a no-kill nation. And it was kind of at the time, it was very much a pipe dream, because when I joined the organization, 17 million animals were dying every year in this country. And there was no concept that no kill was even achievable. Um, and there was no real support for it from the field. We were just seen as, these hippies in the desert, these crazy people that run that sanctuary, and that we were just dream weavers. But we knew that the American public and the people were way ahead of the field, and that the people, if people really knew kind of the facts, if people knew what was happening in their own backyard, that they would really lean in to help. And sure enough, at that point in time, there was only one no-kill shelter. It was in San Francisco, um, and it did seem like a really heavy lift.
I can only imagine. Wow.
So, and so basically what no kill means is that you are saving all of the savable animals in your shelter. And we set a benchmark on that of 90%. And we decided to do that because we know that roughly 10% of the animals that enter a shelter may be too far gone, either medically or behaviorally. And so, some shelters get to 94%, some get to 92, but 90% is a very realistic benchmark for most shelters in this country. And
And go
oh,
ahead.
and today the great news is that number has gone from 17 million down to less than 400,000.
Four.
And
Wow. Wow. That was going to be my question. Have we been able to move the needle? And it certainly sounds like you have.
yeah, totally. I mean, two out of every three shelters are now no kill. Um, and we had a very deliberate effort to figure this out and finally solve this. And we made a declaration at our conference in 2016, at our national conference, to take the entire country no kill by 2025. Obviously, we didn't totally reach that goal, but we made a tremendous amount of progress, and it really forced innovation across the field and put the field on hyperdrive in a way that I've never seen before. And so that was the big benefit of making a bold announcement like that.
I think it's a great human nature thing that we want to all make a difference. We want to do something that is purposeful and makes a difference. And oh, wow, you just got to be riding high with that kind of a transformation, let's say. It's incredible. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's humbling and it's an honor to really be here and do this work and I think about there's so many great causes out there, but so many of them don't have a cure or a solution. And I think about what I do and what I get to do every single day and everybody that I work with. Um, we know how to do this and we know how to finish the job. And that is, to me, one of the coolest things is how often do you get to be a part of real societal change? And that's what we're looking at every single day.
Well, I'm fascinated with your journey, and the journey wouldn't be complete without dealing with this. I hope you're okay with this if we go a little bit personal here, but I did read somewhere that you actually ran a marathon while going through radiation therapy for breast cancer. And
Mm.
again, that's part of the journey. So during that period where you're going through that, what lessons do you learn? What do doing what you have to do to survive yourself, not only helping animals, but how does that prepare you for the next phase?
Yeah, that was, that I think that's one of those things that, nobody expects. You are, um, especially, I'd run probably 10 marathons at that point in my life. Super clean eater, did a lot of outdoor stuff, a lot of hiking, um, and really was very conscious about my health. And so to get that diagnosis, nobody wants to hear those three words, you have cancer, at age 39 was just, it's a big shock. And so by the time I discovered it and I decided to go to UCLA to get treated, because I knew that the likelihood is that I had one shot at doing this right. And I wanted to try and find the very best doctor I could find. And I ended up finding this oncologist who helped develop the treatment for my particular cancer, which was very cool. And you talk about sort of being in the in the aura of somebody who has really changed the world. This guy did. And you know, when I first sat down with him, he was one of those guys that had terrible bedside manner. If you're listening, Dr. Glassby, I love you. But, I said to him, he said, your cancer is one of the most aggressive that we've seen in a long time.
Right.
And it was it was a very advanced cancer, to the point where, basically they were not certain that I was going to make it. And he I said, look, I'm really concerned about the effects of chemotherapy on my brain because I've read a lot about, it causes brain damage for anybody that has chemotherapy. It's an agent that passes the blood-brain barrier and wreaks havoc on your brain. And he just stared at me and paused for a minute and he said, would you rather be dead or have a bit of brain damage? And I said, okay, let's go for it. So it was a really brutal treatment protocol that I had. And that went on for 2 years at UCLA. And the last leg of it was, I had chemotherapy, bunch of surgeries, and then radiation therapy. I had 39 rounds of radiation. And, I'd been running this marathons every single year. And I thought, you know what? This condition, this disease is robbing me of so much stuff right now. I'm not going to let it rob me of doing what I love, and I love running. And it was a way for me to, there was so much in my life at that point that I didn't have control over, but I could control this one thing. And so I ended up training for the marathon in the, if you're a basketball fan, the Pauley Pavilion. And, there are all these John Wooden quotes all over the walls that are really inspiring. And that was terrific to be there and at UCLA to be able to train. And then, I think I was on treatment number 32. So when you get that far into your treatment, your body is really hammered. It's raw basically, um, and it was incredibly painful. And so I had my radiation treatment on Friday, got in the car, drove, 8 hours across the Mojave Desert, um, went to bed, woke up the next morning, ran the marathon, rested, and Sunday morning I drove back to LA and had my next round of treatment the following Monday. So that was my schedule, and I was just happy that I finished in less than 5 hours. It was a
Yeah.
very long marathon.
Wow.
So it wasn't my fastest marathon, but it was my best marathon for sure.
Incredible. So I know that what a lot of what you do now too is building coalitions across the nation with other shelters and rescue facilities. And what's your approach to building those relationships, and how do you get everybody on board? And that seems again like a huge task and something that not everyone would look at and say, I can do this, but obviously you did. So what's your approach to those other shelters and facilities?
Well, we really pioneered that model in Utah, where we pulled together a coalition to help get Utah to no kill, and then we took that model to Los Angeles, and that was a lot more challenging because um, there were just a lot of there were a lot more factors at play in LA. And I think when you enter into something like that, I think it's really important that you build a plan together and you're earnest about building that plan together and recognizing that maybe the plan isn't going to go exactly as you think it should go in your head, and being sincerely committed to that process. Because I had a really great mentor in college who used to always say, Julie, those people help support that which they create. And I think I've just seen it play out so many times where you have a group of people who get together and you take all of the data, you put it, up on the whiteboard, and you start dissecting the problem to drive solutions. And that really builds your strategy. And I think that doing that with other members of the animal welfare field, it really builds an ownership and a bond with those folks. And so that really is how we approach those coalitions to tackle a specific city or state in bringing about no kill, and recognizing that you're not always gonna it's not always gonna go the way you imagine that it's gonna go, but part of the process is building that trust with these other groups. And I will say that we've been in situations where it hasn't always been eye to eye, and sometimes you have to um, let that be, let it sit and move along, and potentially circle back in the future to try and rebuild that trust that's been lost. And sometimes it doesn't always work. And so, it's not all rainbows and butterflies, and our field can be quite tough at times. So I'm just proud of what we have been able to build with other organizations, and um, particularly around solving a common issue.
Well, I think what you're saying there too is there are critics of the no-kill approach. And so do you, from a marketing perspective and a collaboration perspective, do you deal with that attitude head on, or do you just ignore it and keep doing what you're doing? What's your approach when you have people that say this isn't the right philosophy?
I think that I think we really do try to live by our values internally and externally. And one of them is the golden rule. And I think that, it's whenever we're challenged on the no kill philosophy, I think we always endeavor to try and take the high road. And um, the antidote to that is the success of what you see in the communities that achieve no kill. And, the stories of all these animals that would have otherwise died are now in a loving home. And I think that really is the most powerful message rather than trying to go head to head on point, counterpoint, this, that. There's not anything that's perfect in this world. And so I think recognizing that all I need to say is when I started, there were 17 million animals dying. Now there's less than 400,000. It's a hard thing to kind of argue with. And so we go back to this is a difficult field that's mentally exhausting and emotionally difficult because you're dealing with life and death decisions every day. So the best thing you can do is to celebrate the positive outcome of an animal and a life that you've just saved and united with their forever home. And so for me, that's extraordinarily rewarding. And that really is the story to tell.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is you have 1,000 employees, you have a big organization now. I'm sure there's people there because of the mission like yourself that it's just so compelling. Yet you also have to keep everybody on mission, on cause, motivated. How do you do that with that many employees and continue to show what you're doing and why it makes a difference?
So I think that we have grown for our field. We've grown very fast, and especially from the time that I started as employee 17, and it has been such a joy, and again, truly an honor to be leading this organization as it transitions from a founder-based organization to the next generation. And I think about the DNA of Best Friends and what the founders started and created. And to me, there are really three elements um, that bind your staff together and really create a true community. And the first one is really mission. And I think clarity and crispness in what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, the simpler it is, the more success you're going to have. And the alignment around that simplicity is so beautiful because when you sit down to create a strategy around your mission or whatever goal you're trying to achieve, and it's super simple, the alignment just clicks into place so quickly. And I think we've really seen that with our employees. It's it's very cool for me to attend a speech or a presentation that one of our employees is giving and to hear them just be totally spot on with the mission and the strategy. It's really cool. And I think it's very empowering too, because once people know exactly where they need to go, then management becomes much, much easier because they have these guardrails they can work within and really make a lot of their own choices to get to that end goal. And that is, that's been proven out time and again. There's all sorts of statistics on that when you have true alignment, growth is, 4x greater than organizations that aren't aligned. It's something like 20% higher employee engagement with alignment. So that mission and that simplicity and alignment are so critical. And I think the next one is values and recognizing that we have some really clear values that we um, we call that internally our values in action, and um, and it's stuff that's like basic human goodness. It's stuff like kindness and the golden rule and gratitude and generosity, and those things are so important to any culture. And it's one thing to just talk about it as a leader, it's another thing to live it. And to me, it's about every day I have an internal goal, which is I'm going to find that one opportunity today to exercise in action one of our guiding principles and values. And it's really powerful. And when you do it in a when you do it with an open heart and with true generosity, people really respond to that. And I think that that really builds an incredible culture, which is kind of the last pillar for me: mission, values, and culture. And I think culture is everything, and the people who work for you, there is no greater asset that any company has than the people that work for you, and the people that work for um, this cause and this organization and this mission. And to me, it's again about uh, demonstrating that yourself in action every day. And I think about the world that we're in today, and we have a really interesting kind of experiment of this during COVID you know, when COVID hit and it was such a crazy time and everybody was scared and nobody knew what was happening. And I was thinking, this thing's going to have a very long tail. And I remember 2 weeks into it, after everything started getting canceled, I had a meeting with our CFO and we sat down and I said, Steve, I'm really concerned about the economy. I'm concerned about donors, people being too afraid to give money right now because everything's so uncertain. And I think that we need to create 3 different scenarios of where we might end up at the end of the year. One that is a 60 to 65% reduction in revenue, 65% of revenue, 75% of revenue, 85% of revenue. And then let's start looking at where we're going to come up with the difference. And it was really scary and very hard because pretty much every scenario, the first thing you go to is, oh, layoffs. Let's do layoffs. And we're looking around and we're seeing all these other companies just laying people off in droves, and including in our field. And I just remember taking long walks in the canyon and long hikes and sort of processing this whole thing. What does that look like for people right now who are getting laid off? There's nobody's hiring. What are they going to do? Where does this leave them? It leaves them out on the street for who knows how long, 3 months, 5 months. And so, Steve and I met again, and he said, you know, reserves for a nonprofit are meant for times like this. This is the time that you pull, we're paying out of reserves because, you've spent all this time putting money away in case of emergency, break this glass. And so I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We are not going to lay anybody off. We're going to ride this tide with everyone. And let's break the glass and take money out of our reserves because part of our commitment, um, we need to be committed to our employees at this point in time. This is a very scary time in human history, and it makes a lot of sense to me to this is exactly what reserves are for. And without our folks and without our employees, we wouldn't be saving a lot of animal lives right now. And they're not going to save themselves. And so we ended up not laying anybody off. We repurposed about 200 people who had jobs that were directly related to the public in one way or another. And so we were having them do things that, like, call our donors and our members to find out how they were doing. We were having them do projects that we'd been putting off, um, before the pandemic, and just finding ways to engage them meaningfully, but recognize that we're dealing with human beings that deserve to be treated with respect, kindness, generosity, the golden rule, all of the things. And I'm very proud of that moment because I think that I still hear about it from employees, I hear about it from volunteers, I hear about it from members. It was easily one of the most powerful things that this organization has done over the years. You talk about all the life saving and stuff, but the tail on that and the good that came out of that was really remarkable. And I think it was such a great lesson for so many of us that had that same initial reaction to say, oh, we're going to have to do layoffs. And I'm really happy that we chose as a senior leadership team to not follow suit on that front.
That's impressive. And also, when you're talking about what you said there, knowing your values and your mission and your purpose are so important because I can make the argument that, you're employee number 17 in a over 1,000 person business. If you were number 17 in a tech company with 1,000 plus employees, you'd probably be living a little different lifestyle because you're in the nonprofit world, right? So it's just to be secure with why you do what you do is important because it could look vastly different depending on where you land.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's, I think it really, to me, is all about, I just think there are things in this world that are, uh, different things drive different people. And for me personally, there are a lot of other things in this world that are more valuable than objects or money or that kind of fame. And I'm not in any way disparaging people who choose
Mhm.
those pathways because they're doing great things. But for me, it's a way to fill the soul, and I see it manifest in so many of our employees and our volunteers and our visitors and our donors. And it's a cool thing, and it's really cool to be a part of something that is so incredibly special in terms of the cause itself, that it is one of the one things that I can think of that's impervious to political grandstanding and all of the negativity in terms of um, it really doesn't have it's not liberal or conservative. It is something that everyone um, relates to because 80% of Americans have pets. And it's such a cause that really joins people together in a way that it brings together divided forces in a way that I haven't seen with really
Yeah.
anything else.
Well, case in point, you get noticed by a lot of people. And looking to do a little research for this interview, I noticed that you were on a podcast with Kevin Bacon, and I'm no Kevin Bacon, but are there other celebrities and other people that do have influence by their followers and whatever that know your cause and help you with your cause?
Oh, we have been really, uh, we have had good fortune shine upon us with that. And it's just, um, and they just keep showing up and it's so much fun. And the best part about it is, when you're a kid growing up and you see some of these people and you just think, oh, that's somebody I'm never going to meet or interact with. And then there you are, doing a podcast with Kevin Bacon and Amanda Seyfried. And it's everything that everybody says. They're just really great people. And to me, the value of them, in my eyes, raises tenfold because they're willing to spend their time, which is so precious and so limited, on promoting a cause like ours. And so, I love that aspect of our work. I love that we have had so many celebrities over the years step forward to really raise their hand and contribute to the cause, like either with their voice or their talent or their connections. Um, we've had a whole bunch of A-listers over the years, um, really helping us out.
Is there one in particular you can think of that because of this connection with animals that you discovered they were very different than like maybe you thought they were in the celebrity world?
Oh my gosh, I would say that number one is Amanda Seyfried. I always thought she was cool, but then when you meet her in person, and she's just a real person, just super cool and very down to earth and very easy to talk to. And Justin Thoreau is another one who's been a tremendous supporter of ours, who is a really great guy and very sweet. And somebody like Dylan Loren, who's Ralph Lauren's daughter, who has started her own Dylan's Candy Bar, candy stores around the country that are sort of retro candy. She's another one that's just a phenomenal person who is really incredibly sweet and helpful. And all of these people are, I mean, I legitimately can say I have not met a celebrity supporter of ours that's been um, somebody that you wouldn't want to hang out with
Wow.
as a regular person at the bar after work. So it that's been a big game changer for us, and it started early on in Los Angeles when a couple of our founders were out, with the table and the coffee can and the mailing list collecting names. That's how they met a lot of these celebrities. Rene Russo was one that they met, James Cameron, um, Wolfgang and Maria Peterson, who did all the great movies, Troy and In the Line of Fire and Air Force One. It's how we got introduced to Jennifer Aniston. It's just been a really big gift for us and something that we didn't really expect or have a strategy around in the early days, but two of our founders, Francis and Silva Batista, really built that celebrity presence that just keeps growing. So again, it's something that I feel really blessed by.
So I have to ask, with all the thousands of animals that you come in contact with or exposed to, you probably have a personal pet. How did you choose, and what is that personal pet that you have?
Oh, so my sort of soul pet, my greatest connection was a cat named Hot Rod, who I named after, if you're a basketball fan, the Utah Jazz used to have an announcer named Hot Rod Hundley, and this cat looked exactly like him. So that's why it's and he was one of those cats that, I'd come home from work and he'd be waiting at the door and, I'd set my stuff down on the table and he'd jump up on the table and then he'd crawl on my shoulder and I'd walk around the house with him. And he was the best. And he lived with me, had a very long life. I adopted him when he was 8 weeks old from the Humane Society of Utah, and he lived till he was 22, which is a
Oh,
very
wow.
long time for a cat. So, uh, but a really sweet boy.
Well, Julie, in anticipation of our conversation today, we've covered a lot of ground, but what haven't I asked you, or what do you want to be sure and get in the program before we sign off today?
I just want to say, for your listeners out there, first of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. It really is an honor, and it helps spread the word. And I would say the second thing is, this is one of the few causes that has a shelter or has a presence in virtually every community in America. And so in your community, there is likely a shelter or a rescue group that needs your help, either volunteer or fostering or donating or even going down to, help them with maintenance, marketing, whatever. There is a group or a shelter in your community that needs you in one shape or form or of another. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to them and support them in any way you can because you will actively be saving lives. And it's not often that you can say that about your volunteer work, but knowing that you're helping at the shelter, even if you have a bathroom and you can foster a couple of kittens for 3 days, you're opening up space in a shelter that would otherwise likely need to euthanize an animal. So that would be my last parting words is please help your local shelter or rescue.
Well, great. Thanks for sharing that. And at this point in the interview, I always do ask my guests the same common question. So that question is, in reference to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
The pearl of wisdom that I would leave you with is that um, your time on this planet is very short and that treat every day as a gift and really, really do that, really mean that um, you are more powerful than you realize, and that every action that you take has a ripple effect, and you have choices in how you relate to others and relate to this world and to relate to our animal friends. And your demonstration of that shows up every single day to other people. And I think we oftentimes go through life where we don't really realize how much power we have and the example that we're setting for others and how much people watch that example. And I think being mindful of that is power in and of itself and changes lives.
Great advice. Well said. Thank you for that. Well, Julie, this has been a real pleasure. I've learned a lot about your organization, and it's very inspiring. And your story is just so heartwarming and a great example of what people can do when they really believe in something and try and make a difference. And wow, you've made a huge difference. So congratulations on your organization, and wish you continued success. And thanks for being a guest on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Take care. We'll see you. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.